Hello, welcome to Ikate's Crossing as we continue our journey, The Secret of Shambhala. We are up to chapter 11. This is part 2. Right, so we're using the Siddhartha Tarot and the Buddhism Oracle cards. So let's dive into today's message in regards to The Secret of Shambhala. Oh, card flew out, so let's do that one there. And we've got these two as well. Okay, card flew out was 8 of Wands. So it feels like things are quite intense. Feels like things are moving quite quickly. Oh, there's another one there that sort of popped out. Okay, so it does feel like things are moving quite quickly in regards to the Secret of Shambhala. Feels like things are sort of starting to really move in the right direction in regards to this. It feels like things are moving quite quickly. It's very intense. There's a lot of passion, a lot of desires, a lot of stuff going on. And we do have the Knight of Pentacles, but we've got him reversed. And so we have this feeling of things not as slow. Maybe we're not feeling very grounded in this. We might be feeling a little out of sorts. We're starting to sort of feel like, you know, as we raise our vibrations, as things start moving quite quickly, it allows us to sort of maybe feel like we're not quite grounded in our energy. Okay, it feels like we're not quite grounded in this energy. Okay, we're not really looking for opportunity or adventures at this stage. It feels like we're just sort of slowing down a little bit. We're allowing ourselves to sort of think very much about where we've been. I think this is very much about looking at the past in regards to the King of Wands. Okay, so we've got the Magician. Here we're sort of looking, we're being asked to sort of dive a little deeper into the surface, using our skills and our abilities to be able to have the sense of the illusion, looking beyond the illusion, allowing us to sort of see what really is happening, using our skills and abilities to begin again on our journey. Feels like we're having a very fresh start to our journey. So it's moving quite quickly, maybe ungrounded in our energy, and so we're not really looking for new adventures. I think we're sort of like being very much in the now. We're maybe reflecting a little bit on the past, but also I feel like there's a reflection on the past, but also being very much in the now, in the moment of it all, as we look beyond the illusion to start fresh, to start again. So yeah, very much about being in the now here. Okay, so the card that we've got here is Manifestation. Creation begins with ideas. Choose which ideas to contemplate so you can generate a fulfilling life. That's kind of interesting, because as we're not really thinking too much about the future, we're right in the moment. We're also, as we're in the moment, we're able to sort of create or contemplate ideas. Okay, I think ideas can come in this moment of now, as we are, as we're being in the moment of now. We're not too worrying about the future. As we're in the now, new ideas can be created so that we can manifest our fulfilling life. So it's very much about being in the now, and then things will start to happen. So let's continue this journey here. The Secret of Shambhala, chapter 11. At one point we stood facing literally miles of temples. As far as we could see, the paths were going in every direction. In the background we could still hear the helicopters. As we stood there, another large temple, 500 feet behind us, came crashing to the ground. "What's happening to the people inside those temples?" I asked Tashi. He stared at the plume of dust rising from the rubble. "Don't worry, they're all right. They can move into another location without being seen. The problem is that their role of sending energy is being disrupted." He looked at both of us. "If they aren't able to help with these situations, who's going to?" Will walked over to Tashi. "We have to decide where to go. We don't have much time." "My grandmother is out there somewhere," he said. "My father told me she is at one of the central temples." I looked out at the maze of stone structures. There is no physical centre. Not that I can see. That's not what my father meant, Tashi said. He meant that grandmother is at a temple that is focused on the central end point of human evolution. Tashi was saying the temples in the distance. You can see the people here better than us, I said to him. Could you talk to them and ask them where to go? I tried to talk to them, he replied, but my energy isn't strong enough. Possibly if I was able to stay here for a little while. Tashi had no sooner finished his sentence than another temple crashed to the ground, this time much closer. We have to stay ahead of the soldiers' energy, Will said. Wait a minute, Tashi said. I think I see something. He was looking out towards the maze of temples. I surveyed the scene as well, seeing nothing different. When I glanced at Will, he shrugged. Where? I asked Tashi. He was already walking down a pathway to the right, motioning for us to follow. After hurriedly walking for 20 minutes, we stopped in front of a temple whose architecture was much the same as all the others, except that it was larger and its dark brown rock carried a slightly bluish hue. Tashi stood motionless, looking directly at the massive stone door. What is it, Tashi? Will asked. Far behind us, as we heard a crash as yet another temple collapsed. Tashi looked over at me. The temple in your dream, the one where you said we found someone, wasn't it blue? I looked at the temple again. Yeah, I said it was. Will walked towards the door and looked back at us. Tashi nodded, and Will swung the huge rock slab back on its hinges. The temple was filled with people. As before, I could only see the slight outline of many bodies. They all seemed to be moving, gathering around us, and I felt awash in a distinct feeling of joy. They were moving in a way that gave me the impression that they were turning towards the centre of the temple. Turning that way myself, I saw a spatial window open. We began to see various scenes in the Middle East, followed by images from the Vatican, then Asia, all seemingly indicating a growing dialogue between the major institutional religions. We watched scenes that showed how an increased tolerance was developing in Christianity in both the Catholic and Protestant traditions. It was becoming understood that the true conversion experience within Christianity and the true devotional enlightenment experiences of the Eastern religions, Judaism and Islam, the experience itself, were exactly the same. It was just that each religion emphasized different aspects of this mystical interaction with God. The Eastern religions emphasized the effects on consciousness itself, the experience of lightness, a sense of oneness with the universe, the release of the ego's desires, and a certain detachment. Islam emphasized the feeling of unity that came with sharing this experience with others, and the power inherent in group action. Judaism emphasized the importance of a tradition based on this connection, of the experience of feeling chosen, and that each person alive is responsible for pushing forward the evolution of human spirituality. Christianity was emphasizing the idea that the spirit manifests in human beings, not just as an increased awareness of being part of God, but also as a higher self, as though we become an expanded version of who we are, more complete, capable with an inner guidance and wisdom leading us to act as if the human personality of God, the Christ, was now looking through our eyes. In the scene before us, we could see the effects of this new tolerance and unity. More and more the focus was being placed on the experience of connection itself, not on the differences of emphasis. There seemed to be growing willingness to resolve ethnic and religious conflicts, a greater communication between religious leaders, and a new understanding of how powerful prayer could be if all extended their fields in religious unity. As I watched, I understood fully what Lama Rigdon and Annie had both said about the unification of religion, that this would be a sign that the secrets of Shambhala were becoming known. At that point, the scene through the window in front of us changed. We could see a group of people talking and joyously celebrating the birth of a baby. Everyone was laughing and passing the infant from one person to another. The people looked to be different from each other, representing various nationalities. As I watched, I got the distinct impression that they represented different religious backgrounds as well. As I looked close, parents of the baby, they looked familiar. I knew it was not them, but the parents' facial features were similar to Pema and her husband's. I strained to see, getting the feeling that we were now being shown something of immense importance. What was it? The scene changed again, and we were now looking at a tropical region, which looked like Southeast Asia or perhaps China. As before, the scene shifted into a house where a number of people, diverse in appearance, were taking turns holding a newborn and toasting the parents. Don't you see what we're being shown, Tashi said. That's where the missing conceptions were going. They were moving to different families all over the world. It must have been a channeling process. Somehow the children were gaining the higher genetic energy of Shambhala before moving on. Will was looking down, thinking he had stared back at us. That's the shift, he said. That's what the legends have been talking about. Shambhala's not moving to one place, it's energy. It's moving to many different locations all over the globe. What? I asked. Tashi looked over at me. You know the legend that says the warriors of Shambhala will stream out of the east and defeat the powers of darkness and create an ideal society? This isn't happening with horses and swords. It's happening with the effect of our extended fields. As the knowledge of Shambhala moves into the world, if all those from every religion who believe strongly in a connection with the divine avoid negative prayer and work together, we can all use the prayer extensions to take over the role of Shambhala. But we don't know everything they're doing, I said. We don't know the rest of the secret. Just as I said that, the scene through the spatial window changed again. Now we could see a great expanse of snow-covered mountains and a group of Chinese military helicopters heading towards us. We saw more temples begin to crumble to the ground as they approached, taking on the appearance of an ancient ruins, then fading away altogether to dust. The scene switched to the outside of the very building where we were, and then inside. We saw ourselves standing in the building, and all around us were not hazy outlines of people, but clear pictures of them. Many were adorned in the formal attire of Tibetan monks, but many others were dressed differently. Some appeared in the clothing of the Eastern religions. Others wore the traditional attire of Hasidic Jews, and still others wore the robes and carried the crucifixes of Christianity. Just as many were dressed as Islamic mullahs. Interestingly, one of them reminded me of a person living near my house in the valley, and my eyes lingered on her. I slipped into a daydream about home. In my mind's eye, I could see everything very clearly. The mountains viewed from my front window, and then the same view from the spring. I thought of the taste of water there. I pictured myself leaning over and drinking. Again we could hear the roar of helicopters very near to us, and the sound of one of the other temples crashing to the ground. Tashi had turned away and walked over to our right. In the scene through the spatial window, we could see what he was doing. Tashi was facing one of the Tibetan monks. Who was that? I asked Will. It must be his grandmother, Will replied. They were clearly speaking to each other, but I couldn't quite understand the words. Finally the two embraced, and Tashi rushed over to us. I was still watching Tashi through the window, but when he reached me, the scene disappeared. The window was still there, but the images within it were fuzzy, like a television set turned to a non-existent channel. Tashi was glowing. Don't you see, he said. This is the temple where they have been watching you and Will the whole time you were trying to reach Shambhala. These people are the ones who have been using their prayer field to help you. Without them, none of us would be here. I looked around and I realized I could no longer see the outlines of anyone around us. Where did they go? I yelled. They had to leave, Tashi replied, now staring up at the empty window hovering in the center of the room. It's up to us now. At that moment, a huge shock reverberated through the temple, and several stones thudded to the ground outside. It's the soldiers, Tashi yelled. They're here. He was looking towards the sound of the helicopters outside. Without warning, the spatial window cleared, and we could see the Chinese getting out of their helicopters right outside. Colonel Chan walked to the front, giving directions to his troop. We could see his face clearly. We've got to uplift him with our fields, Will said. Tashi nodded in the agreement and quickly led us through the extensions. We visualized our energy fields overflowing out of us and into the fields of the Chinese soldiers, especially Chan, lifting them to a new awareness of our intuitions. As I watched his face, he seemed to pause and look up, as if sensing the higher energy. I looked closely for any expression of his higher self, and noticed which seemed to be a slight shift in his eyes, maybe even a half smile. He seemed to be looking around at his soldiers. Focus on his face, I said, on his face. As we did this, he seemed to pause again. One of the soldiers, apparently next in command, walked up to him and began asking him questions. For a moment or two, Chang ignored the junior officer, but slowly the subordinate gained his attention, pointing at the temple we were in. Chang seemed to regain his focus, and an angry expression returned to his face. He motioned for all his soldiers to follow him as he headed towards us. It's not working, I said. Will looked at me. The Dakini aren't here. We have to leave, Tashi shouted. How? Will asked. Tashi turned to face us. We have to go through the window. My grandmother told me that we could leave through the window to the altar cultures, but only if we had help from that location to raise the energy on the other side. What did she mean, help? I asked. Who would help? Tashi shook his head. I don't know. Well, we've got to try, Will shouted. Now! Tashi appeared confused. How did you go through the windows back in the outer rings? I asked. We had the amplifiers back there, he replied. I'm not sure I can do it without them. I touched Tashi's shoulder. Arnie said that everyone in the rings was on the verge of being able to manifest without the technology. Think, how did you do it? Tashi was still struggling. I don't know, really. It was sort of automatic. He paused. I guess we just expected it to occur, and it would happen instantly. Do that, Tashi, Will said, nodding towards the window. Do it now. I could tell Tashi was concentrating totally, and then he looked at me. I have to know where I want to go so I can visualize it. Where are we supposed to go? Wait a minute, I said. What about the dream you had? Weren't you seeing water? Tashi thought for a moment and said it was a place overlooking a source of water. Or maybe, or a spring, I shouted. A spring with a walled-off pool made of stone. He stared at me for a moment. I think so. I looked at Will. I know where it is. It's a spring on the north ridge of the valley where I live. That's where we have to go. At that moment, the temple shook violently again. Images of the temple collapsing or explosions blowing us away filled my mind, and I shook them off. Imagining instead that we would escape, I began to feel like my father caught in a battle I had not asked for, but because of the stakes was unable to avoid. Only it was a battle of the mind. Focus, I yelled. What do we do? We first have to visualize where we're going, Tashi replied. Describe it to us. Hastily, I told them every detail, the mountain path, the trees, the way the water flowed, the colour of the foliage, this time of year. Then we all tried to help as Tashi concentrated on the image. As we watched, the window shifted to that very site. We could see the spring clearly. That's it, I shouted. Will turned to Tashi. Now what? Your grandmother said we would need help. Through the window, we caught sight of a person in the background, and we all focused on the fuzzy image. I struggled to make out who it was, noticing that the individual looked young, in fact about Tashi's age. Finally, the picture cleared and I recognised who it was. It's Natalie, my neighbour's daughter, I shouted, remembering my first intuition of her. It was of the scene. Tashi was smiling broadly. That's my sister. At that moment, another huge piece of the temple crashed to the ground outside. She's helping us, Will yelled, pushing us all towards the window. Let's go. With a swishing sound, Tashi ducked through, followed by Will. Just as I approached the window, the back wall of the temple fell in, and there on the other side stood Colonel Chang. I turned and glanced at him, then moved into the window. His face was still determined as he grabbed a shortwave radio off his belt. I know where you're going, he shouted as the rest of the temple began to fall in. I know. Whoa, that's it for today. Don't forget to check the links down below. Check the links on my channel. So you know when the next video will be uploaded. For the rest, the third part of The Secret of Shambhala, chapter 11. Okay, that's it from me. Take care and blessed be. A big thank you to my Ko-Fi members as well. I do want to say a big thank you to my supporters, and thank you to those who have subscribed to the video, subscribed to the channel. Thank you very, very much. Okay, that's it from me. Take care and blessed be.